I was halfway through welding the gate latch when I heard it again, that faint buzzing above the tree line. At first, I thought it might been a wasp or maybe a stubborn cicada, but no, it was the drone. Same low hum, same blinking red eye circling like it owned the air above my pasture. My dogs, Boone and Tucker, barked from the fence line, hackles raised, tails stiff. Fourth time that week. Maybe the same drone, maybe not. They all looked identical to me, like plastic mosquitoes too arrogant to swat. I killed the torch, lowered my cap, and muttered under my breath, "Come a little lower, boys. Let's see how well you fly with a hole through your belly." Boone gave a sharp bark like he agreed. This land wasn't just dirt and grass to me. It was blood and legacy. 160 acres my father worked and his father before him. Land I'd modernized with solar panels, rain catchers, a pressurized well system, even an automated chicken coop that texted me when eggs dropped. 15 years of sweat, upgrades, and late nights. Also, this place could stand on its own. Self-sufficient, secure, mine. But the air had changed lately. I could feel it in the silence between cicadas, in the way strange cars slowed near my gate with plates covered in dust. Strangers wandering too close, holding up their phones like bird watchers but looking straight past the trees into my fields. And always the drones, watching, recording, never asking. That evening I was closing up the barn when the intercom buzzed at the front gate. A sharp sound, metallic, cutting through the prairie quiet. Boone's ears shot up. Tucker started packing. I pulled the feed up on my tablet. There she was. Bob, sunglasses too big for her face. Lavender blazer sharp enough to cut glass. She smiled at the camera like a realtor on a billboard, only colder. She waved. "Hello, I'm Karen, president of Harvest View Meadows HOA. Just wanted to have a neighborly chat, perhaps over coffee." Harvest View, my stomach soured. A development that sprouted a mile east of me last year like a rash. Cookie-cutter houses lined up like cardboard boxes, zero-lot lines, mailboxes all the same shade of soulless beige. I knew the type. Folks who measured lawn height with rulers and tattled if your shutters didn't match the bylaws. "I don't do coffee," I said into the mic. "Oh, come on, mister," she chirped, voice sweet but brittle. "I'm already here, just a moment of your time." Against my better judgment, I hit the buzzer. Curiosity is a dangerous thing, but silence is worse. A SUV rolled up, sparkling under the late sun, plates reading GR8LIFE, of course. She stepped out, heels crunching gravel, eyes scanning every corner of my place like she was already photoshopping the grain silo and the windmill into something shinier. "You have a lovely property," she said, slipping a glossy brochure into my hand. "Have you ever considered selling?" I didn't answer. She carried on like rehearsed lines off a stage. Expansion, wellness retreat, luxury spa, Tesla charging lounge, a golf course carved into my pasture, a vision of community harmony. I handed the brochure back, not interested. Her smile twitched but stayed in place, the kind of smile you'd find glued on a mannequin. "Mister, I don't think you understand the scale of opportunity here. You'd be generously compensated. Legacy income. No stress, no maintenance. You'd be part of something bigger." I whistled for the dogs, stepped off the porch, boots grinding dust. "Lady, this land is the legacy. I've got cattle, contracts, crops, and a whole lot more dignity than to sell out to a cocktail yoga cult. You can leave now." Something shifted in her eyes then. The mask slipped. What looked polite turned metallic, cold, like machinery recalibrating. She straightened her blazer. "Well then, I suppose we'll have to pursue other options." She got in her, lingered just long enough at the gate to glance at my camera, and then rolled off slow. The prairie went quiet again, but not the quiet I loved. This was heavy silence, the kind you hear before a storm drops down and rips your roof clean off. I stood there a long minute, dust on my boots, the sun bleeding low over the horizon. I'd seen that look before, in the military, in the courtroom, in the eyes of every developer who thought land was nothing but dirt waiting to be paved. People like Karen didn't take no for an answer. And she just made the mistake of treating me like a man who cared about their approval. That night I checked every battery on every camera, locked every gate, set the alarms. The land was mine, but something told me it wouldn't stay quiet for long. 3 mornings later, I found tire tracks on the gravel just inside my gate. Deep grooves, fresh, the kind that only come from someone panicked and throwing the wheel hard to get out quick. Problem was, nobody had my gate code except me and the co-op delivery guy. I'd changed it twice in the last month, yet someone had been inside. I crouched down, pressed my palm against the print. Still warm, my stomach clenched. Whoever it was, they'd turned tail fast. The prairie had its own way of warning a man, a gate swinging open on its own, a crow flying too low. And that morning the warning came through Boone. He let out that slow, guttural growl that wasn't for coyotes or jackrabbits, that was his trouble sound. I followed his gaze to the northern edge, where the service road skirted along my old utility shed. 3 figures were coming up the fence line, bright orange vests, the HOA logo stitched on the back like a badge of authority they hadn't earned. 2 of them walked heavy, wide-shouldered, built like linebackers who never let go of their glory days. The third was pale, skinny, hugging a tablet like it was about to bite him. They didn't bother with the intercom. They didn't wave. They just climbed my fence like it was theirs to cross. I whistled the dogs closer, went inside, and pulled the shotgun from the rack by the kitchen door. It wasn't loaded yet, but they didn't need to know that. When I stepped out to meet them, the leader nodded like we were buddies about to tee off. "Morning, sir. We're here for a preliminary infrastructure survey." "Survey for what?" My voice came out flat, no friendliness left in it. "For the integration of this parcel into the Harvest View Meadows expansion zone," he said. His words sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced them in the mirror. "Territorial Plan Amendment 148. "That's a mouthful of horseshit," I spat in the dirt. "You're trespassing. This land isn't part of your HOA, never has been." The scrawny one lifted his tablet with shaky hands, screen glowing like he was showing me scripture. "Actually, sir, according to the updated map, this tract has been designated Phase 3 of the Horizon Wellness Corridor." I leaned closer. My own name, my family's name, erased from the land deed. My acreage carved into neat little blocks labeled clubhouse, wellness lodges, even something called equestrian zen zone. And the creek that had run through our southern pasture for generations, they'd renamed it, Karen's Hollow. That was it. That was the moment I knew I'd burn the whole place down myself before I'd hand it over. "Where are your documents?" I asked, voice low. "Court orders, surveyor's license, anything signed by a judge, hell, even a notary." They froze, looked at each other. The linebacker cleared his throat. "Well, no." "Then you've got 60 seconds to get off my land before I make it real uncomfortable." They hesitated. That was their second mistake. I walked to the barn and hit the alarm switch. Sirens howled across the pasture, low and bone-rattling. Boone and Tucker launched like rockets, barking, teeth flashing. "Whoa, whoa, whoa," one of the men shouted as Boone closed in. Tucker went wild, circling, snapping at boots. The big one panicked, tried to vault the fence, slipped, and landed face first in the dirt with a thud that echoed. The scrawny one froze, eyes wide, tablet slipping from his hands. The last man scrambled over the gate, lost a shoe, and hit the ground outside in a heap. His radio skittered across the gravel. I didn't move, just watched. From the dirt, one of them groaned. "We thought it was already approved. Karen said the documents were in. She said this land was ours." They weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at the ground, at the dogs, anywhere but into my eyes. 15 minutes later, a deputy rolled up. Franklin, local boy, drank with my dad back in the day. He stepped out slow, calm, hand resting easy on his belt. I handed him the dropped tablet, the radio, and my deed. He skimmed them, jaw tightening. "These boys are lucky you didn't shoot first," he said. "Real dumb to come uninvited out here like this." "Tell their boss," I said. "Seems she thinks HOA stands for Hostile Occupation Authority." The men didn't press charges. Embarrassment was punishment enough. Getting chased by dogs and eating dirt in a cow pasture leaves scars deeper than lawsuits. They limped away, mud on their clothes, one shoe short, dignity long gone. That evening I printed 3 more no trespassing signs in red block letters and planted one right where they'd tried to climb. Fresh footprints still there in the dirt. Then I pulled the surveillance footage, labeled it Karen's Hollow, failed recon, and backed it up twice. Let them try again. 3 days later, I was oiling the hinges on the west gate when a dusty rolled up. Out stepped a kid in a cheap tie, clipboard trembling in his hands. He looked barely old enough to shave. "Mr. Yeah." He held out an envelope like it was radioactive. "You've been served." I took it, gave him a nod, and watched him retreat to his car like he couldn't get away fast enough. Gravel spit from his tires as he sped off. I tore the envelope open. 60 pages of legal sludge, summons to county court. Plaintiff, Harvest View Meadows HOA. Allegations, violation of Regional Development Initiative. Obstruction of authorized survey. Brandishing a weapon in a shared access zone. Failure to comply with Phase 3 integration. Shared access zone, my ass. I flipped through the stack, each page stinking of bureaucratic rot. They weren't just trespassing anymore. They were trying to rewrite the map in a courtroom. On paper, my land wasn't mine anymore. The dog sat at my feet, tails thumping against the porch as if waiting for my call. My hand tightened around those papers. And that's when I realized they weren't just after my property. They were after the idea that a man's land could still be his own. The papers sat heavy in my hands, edges cutting into my fingers like they meant to draw blood. Allegations stacked on top of each other, all dressed up in lawyer talk. Obstruction, zoning violations, brandishing a weapon. They'd even slipped in the phrase shared access zone, as if my private driveway was some kind of public walkway. I leaned back on the porch, Boone's head resting against my boot, Tucker panting in the heat. My land stretched wide before me, but for the first time in years it didn't feel safe. It felt like someone had drawn invisible lines across it, lines that only I couldn't see. I reached for my phone. There was only one person I trusted for a mess like this. Mabel Campbell. She'd been swinging legal hammers longer than I'd been alive. A thorn in the side of every greedy developer in 3 counties. White hair pulled tight in a bun, voice like a buzzsaw, spine of steel. I'd once watched her make a commercial speculator cry on the witness stand just by asking him if he knew how to read. She answered on the second ring. "What kind of trouble have you dragged yourself into this time?" "Karen-shaped," I muttered. There wasn't even a sigh on her end, just a clipped, "Email me everything." By sundown, I scanned the lawsuit, my deed, even my irrigation permits. Mabel didn't waste time. By nightfall, she'd already filed a formal response with the county clerk and told me to start digging up every scrap of paper tied to this land. Fence permits, grazing contracts, satellite photos. "I want a paper trail thicker than Karen's skin cream budget," she said. The next morning, the war spilled into the open. I found a flyer stuffed into my mailbox. Town hall meeting, open forum on regional harmony and rural integration. Saturday, community center. Subtext, let's discuss obstacles to progress. I almost laughed. I knew damn well what obstacle they meant. Saturday came and I couldn't resist. I laced up my dirtiest boots, pinned an old shotgun shell to the brim of my hat, and drove into town. The parking lot was already packed with pastel polos and yoga pants. SUVs lined up in rows like show horses. Inside, about 50 people sat in folding chairs, chattering in the air-conditioned hum. At the front stood Karen, beige pantsuit crisp, microphone in hand like she was auditioning for a TED Talk. The projector behind her displayed a slide titled A Vision for Tomorrow. "Ladies and," she began, her voice sugary smooth, "we face an unprecedented opportunity. A chance to uplift our community with wellness amenities, eco-conscious recreation, and spaces that bring us together. However," she paused, scanning the crowd with practiced sympathy, "one lone landowner stands in the way, refusing to collaborate, threatening our people, obstructing public benefit." She didn't say my name. She didn't need to. Every head in the room turned toward me. I raised my hand, calm, patient. Her smile faltered, just a flicker. "Yes, mister." I stood, my boots creaked against the tile, dust trailing in the fluorescent light. "Couple of clarifications, if I may." My voice carried low, steady. "1, my land is private property, not part of your HOA. 2, there is no law on the books that allows you to annex it without my consent. And 3, your boys trespassed on my land without a warrant, a badge, or a lick of sense. Silence rippled across the room. A few people shifted uncomfortably. One woman hugged her purse like she'd just realized she'd signed up for a cult instead of a community association. Karen's smile returned, porcelain perfect. "Mister, this is a discussion, not a courtroom." "Good," I said, "because in a courtroom I'd be charging you with attempted land fraud, criminal trespass, and impersonating authority." Her composure cracked for a heartbeat, then she tried to pivot. "We have municipal support for the expansion. The zoning board is in favor. There's precedent." "Then why didn't you get a court order before sending 3 goons over my fence?" Her lips parted, no words came. A man in the back, gray beard, HOA badge clipped to his polo, raised his hand. "Wait, you're saying his land isn't under HOA jurisdiction?" Karen's smile stiffened like drying plaster. "Let's move on." She fumbled her papers, changed the slide. Projected growth model. And there it was. On the screen, a glossy rendering of my land, carved up, paved, smothered in green fake grass. A luxury spa, a golf course glowing like it belonged in Vegas, little cottages lined up where my cattle grazed. Projected for Q4 implementation. The room gasped softly. I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo. No shame. By the time I got home that evening, that image was up on the local town Facebook group with a caption. "Harvest View HOA plans to steal land and call it wellness. Nice try." By morning, the post had 200 shares, 50 angry comments, and 1 direct message from someone named Karen HOA president. Her message was one line: "You are being deliberately antagonistic." I replied with a Clint gif, squinting into the sun. But the truth was, I wasn't laughing. They weren't just pushing boundaries anymore. They were redrawing maps, rewriting history, acting like what was mine had always belonged to them. And if I didn't shut this down fast, the next time they came over my fence, it wouldn't be clipboard-carrying idiots. They'd be bringing lawyers. And that was a battle I'd have to be ready for. I've never believed in luck. What folks call luck, I call preparation. You keep your fences mended, your tools sharp, and your records straight. That way, when trouble comes, you don't have to scramble, you're already standing firm. After that town hall circus, I doubled down. Every motion sensor tested. Every gate code reset. I even installed a new thermal camera on the South Ridge just to catch anyone trying to slip in after dark. But I knew it wasn't enough. I didn't just need defense, I needed proof. That's when I remembered the tablet. One of those wannabe surveyors had dropped it when he scrambled over my fence. I'd tossed it into a bin in the barn, half forgotten. Now I dug it out, dust coating the screen, a faint crack across the corner. I knew just the kid to look at it. Jake, my neighbor's son, 20 years old, head full of code and caffeine, the kind of kid who could jailbreak a phone before breakfast. I paid him in brisket and cold, sweet tea. He showed up, cracked his knuckles, and went to work. 15 minutes later, his eyes widened. Dude, you need to see this." Maps, files, PowerPoints. Not just sketches, not just ideas. My land was already chopped up like it had been sold at auction. Labels everywhere: clubhouse expansion, luxury spa retreat, equestrian zen zone. The creek renamed Karen's Hollow like she owned the water god himself put there. "Look at this," Jake said, scrolling faster. "Internal memos, spreadsheets, investor pitches with Karen front and center, standing in front of mock-ups like she was unveiling a new moon colony." One slide stopped me cold. Projected membership model. Exclusive wellness club. Buy-in, $75,000. Annual dues, $15,000. This wasn't community. This wasn't wellness. This was a gated country club dressed up with eco buzzwords and cucumber water. "They're calling you owner unaware of ongoing municipal adjustment process," Jake muttered, reading aloud. "Owner unaware," I said slowly, my jaw clenched. "They think I don't know what's happening on my own land." But Jake wasn't done. He kept digging, moving past the glossy investor decks. Buried deep in a folder of old newsletters, he found something off. "Hey, check this out. Roswell, New Mexico, HOA scandal." The headline made my stomach drop. HOA disbanded after fraud scandal. President resigns. We pulled up the article. There she was, Karen. Same smile, same sales pitch. Different county, different state. Her old HOA had promised wellness gardens, health clinics, a community pool. What they delivered was bulldozers, lawsuits, and developers vanishing with money in their pockets. Karen had skipped town right before the state audit hit. Same playbook, different town. I sat in silence for a long while, the glow of the tablet screen lighting the dust in the barn. Then I sent everything to Mabel. Her reply came back in 10 minutes. Subject line, gotcha. Body, if this holds, we're not just fighting a land grab, we're exposing organized fraud. Prepare for war. I did. Step 1 was media. Quiet battles get buried, loud ones get remembered. I packaged the files, the maps, the memos, and sent them to Owens, a firebrand blogger out of Austin. He'd made his name dragging crooked politicians through the mud. If anyone could shine a spotlight on this mess, it was him. That night he replied, "Sweet Jesus, this is HOA Watergate." By the weekend, he'd published a 3-part. Part 1, false expansion plans. Part 2, the wellness country club hidden behind greenwashed buzzwords. Part 3, Karen's Roswell scandal. The story caught fire. HOA forums lit up. Threads blew sky high. By Monday, even local news anchors were mouthing the words land grab scandal on live television. Karen tried damage control. Of course she did. Sent an email blast calling it all a miscommunication and a coordinated misinformation campaign. She used phrases like strategic planning and community vision, but the ground had shifted. I uploaded drone footage of my fields, wide, untouched, beautiful. Overlaid the words, "This land is not for sale, especially not to liars." By Tuesday, 2 Harvest View families had resigned from the HOA board. One of them even emailed me directly. "We had no idea. We're sorry." I didn't reply, but I forwarded it to Mabel. She said it'd look good in court. And court was coming. But this fight wasn't just about maps and property lines anymore. It was about exposing a woman who'd made a career out of deception. A woman who'd once walked away from lawsuits with clean shoes, leaving everyone else knee-deep in the mud. This time I swore she wouldn't walk away clean. Because I wasn't just fighting for my farm anymore. I was fighting for every poor soul who'd ever been told their home, their yard, their land, was just an obstacle to progress. And I wasn't alone. Courtrooms smell like old paper and quiet failure. That's the first thing I noticed when I walked into county court that morning. The second was Karen. She was seated at the plaintiff's table, hair freshly cut, face caked in foundation thick enough to hide the cracks. She looked like someone who had practiced her smile in the mirror all night, but couldn't quite keep it steady. Flanking her were 2 lawyers, one corporate polished, voice smooth as oil, the other fresh out of law school, still gripping his notepad like it could save him. I took my seat beside Mabel. She wore a charcoal blazer and a look that could cut steel. She didn't bother with papers, just a single thick binder closed tight, her hand resting on it like it was a war drum waiting to sound. The judge entered, tired eyes, sharp mind, a man who had no patience for theatrics. He adjusted his glasses and asked for opening statements. Karen's lead counsel stood first, polished, rehearsed. "Your Honor, we are here today not to punish an individual, but to ensure the collective progress of a community. My clients represent the interests of over 200 families who seek access to a better future, wellness, recreation, unity." He paused, the kind of pause that begged for applause but landed in silence. The defendant's refusal to cooperate with the integration plan, coupled with his armed aggression toward authorized surveyors, represents not only obstruction, but a threat to regional harmony. Regional harmony, that phrase stuck in the air like cheap perfume. I glanced at Mabel. She didn't even blink. When it was our turn, she rose slow, hands clasped behind her back, voice steady as bedrock. Your Honor, what we have here is not a zoning dispute. It is not about progress. It is not even about wellness. It is about theft. The words hung heavy. The gallery shifted. Even Judge leaned forward a hair. My client owns his land, every inch of it. Clear deed, cadastral documentation, uninterrupted title for over 40 years. This HOA has no jurisdiction over him. None. And yet they attempted to rewrite maps, to send unlicensed agents onto his property, and now to fabricate legal authority where none exists. She turned toward Karen's table, voice slicing sharp. And the crown jewel, Your Honor, we have proof that their so-called community project is in fact a private luxury development, with membership fees starting at $75,000 a head. This is not regional wellness. This is a country club in disguise. Karen's jaw tightened. She whispered furiously to her lawyer, but he kept his eyes glued to the table. The judge asked for evidence. Mabel opened the binder and handed it over like she was presenting a coffin lid. Inside, the maps from the tablet, the drone footage of untouched pastures, the investor pitch slides labeled confidential. And then the kicker, side-by-side photographs of Karen at 2 different HOA sites, here in Texas, and years ago in Roswell, New Mexico. Same diagrams, same buzzwords, same promises. Mabel narrated like a museum guide. Same woman, same language, same fraudulent pattern. The opposing counsel scrambled. Irrelevant, prior case sealed, character assassination. Judge waved him off. Let's not insult each other. If it walks like a duck and builds a spa like a duck. The courtroom chuckled. Karen's face flushed crimson beneath the powder. Her lawyer tried to recover, leaning hard into precedent. Your Honor, there is statutory precedent for municipal absorption of independent parcels, under development incentive statutes. Only, Mabel cut in, her voice a guillotine, with city council approval, signed consent of the landowner, and certified proof of public benefit, not a private spa with cucumber water. Silence, then the judge leaned forward, fingers steepled. Does the HOA have any documentation granting them authority over the defendant's property? A transfer agreement, zoning resolution, anything at all? Papers shuffled, whispered excuses, but no answer. That's what I thought, said. By the end of the day, the judge had ordered both sides to submit additional documentation. But his warning to the HOA was clear. No more speculative activity, no more trespassing, no more acting as if the land was theirs. Outside, the cameras were waiting. A local reporter shoved a mic in my face. Mister, care to comment on the allegations? I looked straight into the lens. My voice stayed calm, even. When someone tries to steal your land with a knife, you show up with a spotlight. That's what this is. That clip aired that night. The next morning, my inbox overflowed. Ranchers, veterans, neighbors from 2 states over. Folks who'd been steamrolled by HOAs and never fought back. Folks who wished they had. Karen tried her own spin, a Q&A with her HOA members. It was supposed to be polished, controlled, a chance to salvage her image. But it cracked wide open. Someone asked, why did the judge say the land isn't ours? Karen froze, stammered. Because the process isn't complete yet. Another voice chimed in. Why did you tell us the golf course was for the community if it's membership only? Her face tightened, her hands shook, and then click. Stream ended, comments disabled. The damage was done. By week's end, Mabel filed a motion for summary dismissal. Not only that, she filed for sanctions against the HOA, abuse of process, bad faith litigation. And judge granted a temporary injunction. No HOA contact with my land, no development references in print or online. That's when the snakes started eating each other. The HOA wasn't just losing a lawsuit. They were losing the image they'd built, clean, modern, community-minded. And all of it was unraveling under the weight of one thing they hadn't planned on. A man who didn't scare, and a lawyer who didn't lose. The verdict came down on a Tuesday, and I wasn't even in the courthouse when it happened. Mabel told me not to. Hovering makes you look nervous, she said. Fix something instead. So I was in the barn, grease up to my elbows, wrestling a busted axle on the seed spreader when the call came. My phone buzzed once on the workbench, and I knew. I answered with a grunt. "You might want to pour yourself something stiff," Mabel said, "because I've got good news and a hell of a lot of it." I don't drink during the day, but I damn near made an exception right then. "The court dismissed all their claims," she said, voice sharp with satisfaction. "With prejudice. That means they can't refile, and they granted our counterclaim, trespassing, defamation, attempted coercion, unlawful interference with private property. Oh, and sanctions for abuse of the legal system." I sat down on a hay bale, grease still on my hands, the words sinking in slow like bourbon in the bones. "How much?" I asked. 620,000, she said, crisp as a rifle shot. "Damages, legal fees, punitive fines, and the kicker. The court froze their discretionary funds to secure the judgment. They've got 30 days to pay or they start liquidating assets." I let out a low whistle. "Assets." "Common areas," she said. "Green space, tennis courts, their shiny little wellness pavilion. Turns out those aren't shielded from civil judgments." For a long moment, I just sat there smiling, Boone and Tucker packing at my boots like they could feel the shift in the air. Karen didn't even show up for the ruling. Her lawyers did, but they looked like they'd just lost a high-stakes poker game to a blind man. When Mabel slid the paperwork across the table, one of them muttered, "This is going to bankrupt them." Mabel didn't blink. "Yes," she said, "that's the point." By the end of the week, the fallout hit full stride. First came Karen's removal. Emergency board session, closed doors, whispers spilling out into the parking lot. Word was she didn't go quietly, something about throwing a latte at someone's and screaming at her board about visionless peasants. I wasn't there, but the picture painted itself in my mind clear as day. Second, the news. Local anchors, grinning like they'd been waiting their whole careers for this kind of story, led with HOA ordered to sell assets after land grab scandal. Behind them on the screen, one of my drone shots of the pasture at sunset. They even gave me credit, footage courtesy of private landowner. That felt good, real good. But it got better. Turns out the county zoning officer who'd rubber-stamped those fake maps, the one who'd slipped Karen's integration plan through without scrutiny, wasn't just some paper pusher. He was her cousin, and the court's discovery process had turned up the emails. "Don't worry about the holdout. We'll get the survey through provisional. He's old school, just needs pressure." When that email hit the council chambers, the zoning officer was suspended by sundown. Karen, meanwhile, was suddenly being looked at for fraudulent misrepresentation before municipal boards. It was like pulling one thread and watching an entire sweater unravel. That week my phone rang with numbers I didn't recognize, people from across the state, even out of state, wanting to tell their own stories. Folks who'd lost land or nearly lost it to HOAs with too much power and too little conscience. One man from Arizona said, "You made a dent in the machine, man. You don't know how big that is." I didn't say much, just wrote his number down and kept it in a drawer. Friday, a manila envelope showed up at my gate. No return address. Inside, Karen's original investor deck annotated in red pen. Next to one slide, the one labeling my farm as Q4 transition zone, someone had scrawled, "This didn't age well." I framed it, hung it in my office. By the end of the month, Harvest View was bleeding. The tennis courts went up for sale. A local contractor bought them cheap, planning to turn the space into a dog park. The wellness pavilion was auctioned to a church group. I even got offered first refusal rights on a lot bordering my west pasture. I passed. I didn't need more land. I just needed mine to stay mine. The best part wasn't the money, wasn't even the sanctions. It was what Judge wrote in his ruling, words that would live longer than any of us. An HOA is not a shadow government. It may not override property rights through social pressure, fabricated authority, or bureaucratic sleight of hand. This court finds the actions of the plaintiff reckless, entitled, and wholly incompatible with lawful governance. Damn right, Your Honor. I printed that too, tucked it in a folder marked in case of future idiots. Because one thing I've learned about life, the next Karen is always just one neighborhood barbecue away. Fallout spreads faster than fire on dry prairie grass. Once the verdict hit, the story stopped being about me and my land. It became a cautionary tale for every HOA within earshot. Karen's name was everywhere, not in glossy brochures or investor pitches anymore, but in headlines, court documents, and angry social media threads. She went from visionary leader to serial predator overnight, her smiling face dragged across every screen as the woman who tried to steal a farm and lost $500,000 doing it. Her allies melted away first. 2 of her own board members resigned, their letters dripping with phrases like misled and betrayed trust. The local zoning board distanced themselves, filing formal apologies for oversight failures. Even her polished lawyers began to hedge, requesting to withdraw from representation before the dust had even settled. But the worst part for her wasn't the headlines or the resignations. It was watching her dream empire dismantle piece by piece. The HOA started selling off its own skin to pay the judgment. The tennis courts went first. A contractor picked them up for pennies, already planning to bulldoze and put in a dog park. The wellness pavilion followed, auctioned to a church group who saw a sanctuary where she'd once promised spa retreats. Even the carefully landscaped green space she'd bragged about in meetings was marked for sale, parceled like scraps at a county fair. I didn't bid on a thing. They offered me first rights on a strip of land bordering my west pasture, but I shook my head. I didn't need more acres. I just needed the ones I had to stay mine. That's the thing about victory most people don't understand. It isn't about expansion. It isn't about trophies. Sometimes it's about holding steady, standing firm while everything else tries to push you off your feet. And then there was Karen herself. She didn't fade quietly. She was dragged out kicking, her pride snapping like brittle glass. At the emergency board meeting that voted her out, witnesses said she hurled insults at everyone in sight, accusing them of being visionless, cowardly, small-minded. Someone swore she threw a latte at in the parking lot before storming off. I wasn't there, but I like to picture it. Not long after, the county ethics board opened a formal investigation into her and her cousin at zoning. Emails don't lie. Neither do bank transfers. The whispers around town were that she'd skimmed HOA funds into shell accounts tied to consulting services. That might worked once in Roswell. But lightning doesn't strike the same place twice when a man like Owens is digging through your past. Every time her name came up on the news, I'd catch myself pausing whatever I was doing, tightening a gate chain, stacking hay just to watch. She'd gone from polished to pale, her eyes darting like a cornered animal as she dodged cameras outside hearings. Funny thing about power. Folks treat it like armor, but the truth is it's paper thin. Once you rip it, people see right through. Meanwhile, out here on my land, the prairie started breathing easier. The silence returned, not heavy like before, but natural again. The kind of quiet where you can hear the wind through the oaks, the buzz of cicadas, the soft creak of a gate hinge as the sun drops low. One evening, I carved a new sign for the front gate. Walnut finish, bold letters burned deep into the wood. Private land not for sale. TRSBSSERS will be PHOTOJRAPHED, FINED, and LAUGHEDAT. I hung it with brass bolts, stepped back with Boone and Tucker at my side, and admired the weight of it. It wasn't just a warning. It was a statement. A week later, the cameras caught a familiar rolling past slow. Karen's, she didn't stop, didn't honk, just sat there idling long enough to read the sign. Her face, hidden behind those ridiculous oversized sunglasses, didn't give much away. Then she turned the wheel, rolled off like a dog testing the electric fence one last time and learning better. That night, I poured myself a glass of sweet tea, leaned against the post, and watched the sunset bleed across the pasture. The land was quiet again. Mine again. But something had changed. It wasn't just about me anymore. People were reaching out from across the county, even across state lines. Folks who'd been burned by HOAs, who'd signed papers they didn't understand, who'd lost yards, homes, or whole livelihoods because nobody fought back. And now they had a story, proof it could be done. Proof that one man, one farm, one deed could stand up against the machine and win. Funny thing, I'd started this fight thinking it was just about defending my fence line. Turns out, I'd kicked over a hornet's nest bigger than I knew. And part of me wondered, maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was just the beginning. A month after the dust settled, the prairie felt like it had exhaled. The tension that had knotted itself into every fence post and every gate latch was finally gone. Out here, time has a way of stretching, days slow, chores pile, seasons roll, but the weight of a fight like that lingers. I decided it was time to mark the end properly. So I built a new gate sign, not just a warning printed on aluminum, but something solid. I spent a whole weekend sanding walnut boards, burning the letters in by hand. Big, bold, carved deep enough you could run your fingers through them. Private land not for sale. TRSBSSERS will be PHOTOJRAPHED, FINED, and LAUGHEDAT. I hung it with brass bolts, stood back, and let the dog sit at my side. The setting sun caught the edges of the letters, making them glow like embers. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight lift clean off my chest. Funny, isn't it? After all the lawyers, the cameras, the courtrooms, and the headlines, this little slab of walnut with a few words burned and felt like the truest victory. A week later, the cameras picked up movement at the gate. Hoakaren's. She didn't roll down the window, didn't get out, just sat there, sunglasses hiding her eyes, staring at the sign. For a long second, I swear I could almost hear her thinking, calculating. Then she turned the wheel, slow, deliberate, and drove away, like a dog who finally understood the fence was live. I didn't chase, didn't curse, just poured myself a glass of sweet tea and leaned against the post, watching the prairie burn orange under the evening sky. The fight was over. But the story was. The news ran their final follow-ups. HOA liquidation notices in the classifieds. Common areas auctioned to whoever wanted them. The tennis courts bought out for a dog park. The pavilion handed over to a church group. The rest scattered to the wind like ash. People sent me messages, some strangers, some neighbors I'd barely spoken to. Thank you for standing up. Thank you for fighting back. One man from 3 counties overwrote, "We didn't think anyone could stop them. You proved us wrong." And I realized this wasn't just my fight. It never was. Every time an HOA bullied a family into silence, every time they rewrote rules to corner someone into selling, every time they leaned on the illusion of authority, it chipped away at the idea that home could mean yours. And maybe, just maybe, what we'd done here put a crack in that armor. The prairie has a way of reminding you of scale. You think your fight is the whole world. Then you look out at a horizon that stretches forever, and you remember you're just one man, one life, one set of boot prints in the dirt. But sometimes, one set of prints is enough. The next morning, I went out to check the gate and found a sticky note tucked under the keypad. Yellow paper, ink smudged from the morning dew. Thank you for fighting back. Lot 82, we quit the HOA too. I stood there a long while, the note crumpled gently in my fist, the dogs circling my boots. That's the thing about battles. You never really know who's watching, who's waiting for someone else to stand first. Turns out courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a neighbor slipping a note under your gate when no one's looking. I kept that note because it reminded me that sometimes the loudest victories aren't shouted from a witness stand or printed in bold headlines. Sometimes they're whispered, one person at a time, passing courage forward. As for me, I went back to work. Back to welding, back to mending fences, back to mornings where the loudest thing on the land was the creak of a gate hinge and the bark of Boone chasing a rabbit. But I'll tell you this much. If another Karen ever comes down that gravel road, brochure in hand, smile too wide, eyes too cold. Well, I've got cameras, I've got dogs, I've got deeds, and I've got a sign that says it plain enough. And now I've also got a story. One I'll tell as long as folks are willing to listen. Because sometimes the best way to grow peace is to burn a little first. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next mystery on HOA Hunter Stories.